On the morning of June 10, 1991, an 11-year-old girl put on her favorite pink jacket, kissed her family goodbye, and walked 60 yards down a quiet street in South Lake Tahoe, California, toward a school bus stop she would never reach. Her stepfather, Carl Probin, watched her from the driveway. He watched a gray car slow to a stop beside her. He watched a man reach out from the passenger window. He heard something he couldn't quite name. And then he watched his daughter disappear inside that car. Carl grabbed his bicycle. He pedaled after them. He pedaled until the car turned a corner and was gone. That morning in June would mark the beginning of one of the longest, most haunting disappearances in American history. Not because the clues weren't there. Not because the evidence was buried too deep. But because the answers were, in a very real sense, sitting in a backyard 170 miles away, and for 18 years, 2 months, and 14 days, not a single person in a position to look ever fully looked. Her name was Jaycee Lee Dugard. She was 11 years old when she vanished. She was 29 years old when she was found. And what happened between those 2 moments is a story about a little girl who survived the unsurvivable, and a system that came heartbreakingly close, again and again, to saving her. This is her story. And it needs to be told. If this is the kind of story that stops you cold, you're already in the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the Cold Case Unearthed community. We don't sensationalize. We investigate. Drop a like so this story reaches the people who need to hear it, and leave a comment below. What do you already know about this case? Let's talk. South Lake Tahoe sits at over 6,000 feet above sea level, right on the edge of the California-Nevada border. It is a mountain town in the truest sense, shaped by pine forests and cold blue water, the kind of place where the air smells like snow even in early summer. Tourists came for the lake. Locals came, or stayed, for something harder to name. A sense that the mountains were paying attention. That the world beyond the tree line was smaller than it seemed. Washone Boulevard was not a dramatic street. It was the kind of street that exists in every American town, modest houses, driveways, a sidewalk where children waited for the school bus each morning. The Gibson family lived at one end of it. The Probin family lived down the block. Neighbors who waved. A community that still believed in the ordinary. Terry Probin had remarried after separating from Jaycee's biological father, Ken Dugard. Her new husband, Carl Probin, had taken to stepfatherhood with genuine warmth. He had driven Jaycee to school events. He had taken her to pick out a kitten, a small gray cat she named Tabby, and he had watched her talk about that kitten with the particular joy that 11-year-olds reserve for things that are entirely theirs. Jaycee Lee Dugard was born on May 3, 1980, in Anaheim, California. By the spring of 1991, she had been living in the Lake Tahoe area for several years. She was a 5th grader. She was quiet and thoughtful and wore her favorite pink jacket whenever the morning allowed it. She was, in every visible way, an ordinary child living an ordinary life. The morning of June 10 was one of those mornings that never announce what they are about to take. Carl Probin was in the driveway. The coffee was somewhere behind him, cooling. He watched Jaycee walk toward the bus stop, 60 yards, no more, the way he had watched her dozens of times before. There was no reason to follow her. There was no reason to feel anything other than the easy inattention of routine. Then the gray car slowed. Witnesses in the area later described it as a gray or silver Chevrolet sedan. 2 occupants. A woman driving. A man in the passenger seat. The car pulled up alongside Jaycee and stopped. What happened next took fewer than 30 seconds from start to finish. A stun gun discharged. Jaycee was pulled through the window. The car accelerated left onto Pioneer Trail and was gone. Carl Probin was already on his bicycle. He rode as fast as he could. He reached Pioneer Trail and found nothing, no car, no dust, no sign of which direction they had turned. He circled back and called 911. The call was logged at 8:12 in the morning. El Dorado County Sheriff's deputies arrived within minutes. They found a schoolbook on the sidewalk near the bus stop. They found the tire marks where the car had accelerated from a standstill. They found Carl Probin standing in the road, still breathing hard, his bicycle propped against his leg. His face, by every account, was the face of a man who already knew he was too late. What they did not find was Jaycee. The investigation launched immediately. A vehicle description went out over law enforcement radio. The California Highway Patrol issued an alert. By noon, Jaycee's school photograph, her hair long and loose, her smile slightly uncertain, the way children's smiles often are when a camera is pointed at them, was being circulated across the entire region. It ran in newspapers. It aired on local television. It appeared on flyers tacked to telephone poles along Pioneer Trail and taped into the windows of businesses around the lake. Carl Probin submitted to a polygraph examination within days. He passed. Still, the tips came in slowly. Witnesses confirmed the gray car. No one had written down the license plate. There were no surveillance cameras on that stretch of road in 1991. No cell tower records. No digital trail of any kind. The abduction had happened in the open, in daylight, and left almost nothing behind. The trail went cold the way mountain weather turns, suddenly, completely, and without warning. But the trail had not disappeared entirely. Because 170 miles to the south, in a suburb of Antioch, California, a man named Phillip Garrido had just returned home. Antioch sits in the far eastern reaches of Contra Costa County, where the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta spreads flat and wide and tract housing runs from the freeway in every direction. It is the kind of suburb that feels built for anonymity, houses close together, fences touching, neighbors who nod but do not ask. The streets are wide. The lawns are small. Nothing about the landscape suggests that secrets are kept there, which is precisely why they are. Phillip Garrido lived at 1554 Walnut Avenue. He had lived there for years, in a house that belonged to his elderly mother, Patricia. He had a wife, Nancy Garrido, whom he had married in a prison ceremony in 1981 while he was serving a federal sentence for kidnapping and rape. That detail is worth sitting with. He married her from inside a prison. She said yes. In 1976, Phillip Garrido had kidnapped a 25-year-old woman named Catherine Calloway at knife point. The abduction happened in South Lake Tahoe, the same town, the same geography, the same mountain streets. He drove her to a storage unit in Reno, Nevada, and held her there for hours. He was convicted on federal kidnapping charges and sentenced to 50 years in federal prison. He served 11. He was paroled in 1988. By the summer of 1991, he had been out of federal prison for fewer than 3 years. His parole was supervised. He had a parole officer. He had scheduled check-ins, random drug tests, standard conditions. On paper, the system was watching him. On the morning of June 10, 1991, Nancy Garrido drove the gray sedan north on Highway 50, up into the Sierra Nevada, through the pine corridors above the lake. Phillip sat in the passenger seat. Between them, on the floor or the seat, was a stun gun. They drove the residential streets of South Lake Tahoe until they found what they came for. Jaycee Lee Dugard was 11 years, 1 month, and 7 days old. After she was pulled into the car, she was covered and told not to move. The car drove south, back down the mountain, through the flat heat of the Central Valley, and into Antioch. The drive takes approximately 3 hours under normal conditions. There is no record of any stop. There is no gas station receipt, no witness who saw the car, no moment along that 3-hour corridor where the world intersected with what was happening inside that vehicle. At some point during that drive, Jaycee Dugard passed from the life she had known into the one that would contain her for the next 18 years. The exact moment, the moment she fully understood what was happening, is not documented. Only 3 people ever knew it. Only one of them is alive today to speak about it. The gray car turned into the driveway at 1554 Walnut Avenue. The garage door closed. A neighbor 2 houses down said later that she remembered hearing something that afternoon. She wasn't sure what. She didn't think much of it. She didn't call anyone. There was no reason to. 170 miles north, on Washone Boulevard, a pink backpack still lay at the edge of the road. Officers were still canvassing. Terry Probin was being interviewed by detectives for the second time. Carl Probin was answering questions again in a room that smelled of coffee and fluorescent light. The school bus had come and gone. Tabby the kitten was waiting at home. The first 72 hours of a missing child case are, statistically, the most critical. El Dorado County detectives worked through them without meaningful rest. They mapped the route the gray car had most likely taken. They canvassed every gas station, every diner, every pay phone along Highway 50 between South Lake Tahoe and the Nevada border. They interviewed school bus drivers and crossing guards and every adult who had been within eyesight of Washone Boulevard that morning. Carl Probin remained under scrutiny for longer than the evidence warranted. This is not unusual. In cases where a child goes missing, family members are statistically the most likely suspects. But the polygraph, the bicycle, and the 30-second timeline all pointed outward, away from the family, toward the gray sedan and 2 people whose names no one yet knew to say. By the end of June, the case had attracted national attention. America's Most Wanted featured Jaycee's photograph. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children listed her. Tips arrived from around the country, hundreds of them, each one logged, each one followed to its end, each one arriving at nothing. Months passed. The leads dried up. Resources thinned. El Dorado County is not a large department, and the arithmetic of law enforcement is unforgiving. New cases arrived. Detective hours spread thinner. The file stayed open. The photograph stayed on the board. But the active investigation slowed to something between a crawl and a vigil. By 1992, the tips had nearly stopped. By 1993, Jaycee had been missing for 2 years. Terry Probin gave interviews. She appeared on television programs dedicated to missing children. She refused to take down the flyers. She called the tip line herself, sometimes, to ask whether anything new had come in. Nothing had. Meanwhile, at 1554 Walnut Avenue in Antioch, Phillip Garrido was being visited regularly by his federal parole officer. The conditions of his supervision were specific: no alcohol, no controlled substances, no contact with minors, no possession of pornography. The parole officer came to the house. He knocked on the front door. He spoke with Garrido. He filed his reports. He did not go into the backyard. The backyard at 1554 Walnut Avenue was not visible from the street. A high wooden fence enclosed it completely. Behind that fence, Garrido had been constructing, slowly, over months and then years, a compound of soundproofed sheds, tent structures, and partial enclosures that would eventually sprawl across nearly half an acre of the property. You could stand on the sidewalk and see nothing of it. You could stand on the front porch and see nothing of it. You could park in the driveway, walk to the front door, knock, wait, speak, and leave without ever knowing it existed. The parole officer did exactly that. Again and again and again. In 1994, Jaycee became pregnant. She was 14 years old. She gave birth to a daughter in August of that year, delivered by Phillip Garrido inside the compound, with no medical care, no anesthesia, and no contact with any outside authority. She named the baby Amber. She was 14. She delivered her child in a shed. In 1997, she gave birth to a second daughter, Starlet. She was 17 years old. Neither birth was registered. Neither child was reported to any county or state authority. Both girls grew up inside the backyard compound at 1554 Walnut Avenue. Their existence was entirely unknown to the world. The parole check-ins continued. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment saying I'm still here. Let's see who's truly following this story. This is Cold Case Unearthed, and we are just now getting to the part that will make you question everything you thought you knew about how the system is supposed to work. In 2006, Garrido's parole supervision transferred from federal jurisdiction to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. A new parole agent named Eddie Santos was assigned to the case. Santos visited the house on Walnut Avenue. He noted that Garrido appeared stable. He filed his reports. He assessed the property from the front of the house. He did not go into the backyard. In 2008, something happened that should have ended everything. A neighbor called the Antioch Police Department. The call, later reviewed and confirmed, described what the neighbor believed to be tents and a possible hidden enclosure behind the Garrido property. The call was taken seriously enough to dispatch an officer to the address. The officer arrived. The officer spoke to Garrido at the front door. The officer did not conduct a search of the property. The call was logged and closed. Jaycee was 28 years old. Her daughter Amber was 14. Her daughter Starlet was 11, the exact age Jaycee had been when she was taken from Washone Boulevard. The case was still open in El Dorado County. A detective named Jim Watson had been working it on and off for years. He had a file. He had the photograph. He had the composite sketch of the gray car and the stun gun and the 30-second timeline. He had none of the answers. He did not know that the answer was a backyard. Now consider what the public record reveals about the years between 1991 and 2009. Phillip Garrido had a prior kidnapping conviction in the same geographic region where Jaycee was taken. He was released after serving only 11 years of a 50-year sentence. His parole supervision had been transferred across jurisdictions at least once. A neighbor had called police about the property and the call was closed without a search. A parole officer had visited the house more than 60 times over the span of several years and never conducted a thorough inspection of the backyard. None of these facts, taken alone, could have solved the case. But taken together, they form a pattern. A pattern of near misses. A pattern of open doors that no one walked through. A pattern of a system doing most of what it was designed to do, but not quite all of it, and that small unfinished fraction was exactly the space in which Phillip Garrido had hidden an entire life. In 2009, his behavior became noticeably more erratic. He had long held religious delusions, a belief that he communicated directly with God, that he had been granted a special spiritual mission, that he possessed gifts no other man possessed. These beliefs were not new. What was new was his desire to share them publicly. He filed paperwork to hold a religious event on the campus of the University of California, Berkeley. This decision would unravel everything. On August 24, 2009, Garrido arrived at the UC Berkeley campus. He brought Nancy. He brought Jaycee, who by now went by the name Alyssa, and he brought her 2 daughters. He was there to finalize a permit for his event. He handed campus security officer Allison Jacobs a pamphlet describing his ministry. Officer Jacobs felt something was wrong. She could not name it precisely in the moment. The 2 teenage girls accompanying Garrido were quiet in a way that felt studied, watchful in a way that felt practiced. Their effect was flat in a manner she found unsettling. Garrido's eye contact lasted too long. His manner had the particular intensity of someone who has rehearsed their normalcy rather than inhabited it. Officer Jacobs made a note of the interaction. Then she ran Phillip Garrido's name through the law enforcement database. The result came back: registered sex offender. Federal parolee. Prior conviction for kidnapping and rape. She called his parole officer. Parole agent Eddie Santos was contacted. He directed Garrido to report to the parole office the following morning, August 26, 2009, and to bring the women and children who had accompanied him to Berkeley. Bring them with you. 4 words that changed everything. The following morning, Garrido arrived at the Contra Costa County Parole Office. He brought Nancy. He brought Jaycee. He brought Amber and Starlet. He arrived voluntarily, because he had no reason to believe that this visit would be different from the hundreds of visits that had come before it. He had spent 18 years building a life that appeared invisible from the outside. He had been checked on. He had been visited. He had been supervised. And nothing had ever come of it. He walked through the door with his family and sat down. In a separate room, investigators spoke with Jaycee. She gave her name as Alyssa. She said the girls were hers. She said Garrido was a good man, a religious man, that he had helped her when she had nowhere else to go. Her voice was calm. Her answers were composed. 18 years of captivity had taught her exactly how to perform normalcy under pressure, because performing normalcy under pressure had, for 18 years, been the difference between safety and harm. She said nothing about Washone Boulevard. She said nothing about a pink jacket. She said nothing about a kitten named Tabby. But the agents kept asking. Not aggressively. Patiently. They had already run Garrido through the database. They already knew what they were looking at. They asked careful questions and waited for careful answers and let the silence do the work that pressure never could. Somewhere in that room, in the late afternoon of August 26, 2009, something inside Jaycee Dugard shifted. She told them her real name at 5:48 in the evening. She was 29 years old. She had been missing since she was 11. She had last been seen walking toward a school bus stop in South Lake Tahoe, California, on a June morning 18 years ago, wearing a pink jacket and thinking about her kitten. The El Dorado County Sheriff's Department received a call at approximately 6 in the evening. The call went to Detective Jim Watson, who had worked the file for years. He took the call. What he said in response is not recorded in any public document. What he felt in that moment is not available to us. We have only the official record. At 6:03 in the evening on August 26, 2009, the Jaycee Lee Dugard case was officially reclassified from missing person to found. The word found is doing enormous work in that sentence. While Garrido was in custody, officers drove to 1554 Walnut Avenue in Antioch and entered the backyard for the first time. What they found there has been documented in official reports, in court records, and in Jaycee's own memoir. The sheds were soundproofed with foam insulation. The tents were connected by tarps and partial walls that formed a rough sequence of rooms. There was a printing area where Garrido had run his side business. There was a sleeping area. There was a garden, small, attended, with the evidence of years of care. There were books, because Jaycee had taught herself, and later her daughters, from whatever textbooks and reading material Garrido allowed through the fence. And there was a piano keyboard. Somewhere inside that compound, behind a fence no parole officer had ever fully crossed, a woman who had been kidnapped at 11 years old had learned to play the piano. She had taught herself. In the space between everything that was being taken from her, she had made something that was entirely her own. That detail, the piano, is the one that the documentation offers and then does not explain. It just sits there. A piano keyboard in a shed. And everything it means about the human capacity to find something, anything, to hold on to. Amber was 15 at the time of discovery. Starlet was 11. Neither had ever attended school. Neither had ever seen a doctor beyond what Garrido permitted. Neither had ever, in any meaningful sense, interacted with the world on the other side of that fence. They had lived their entire lives within its boundaries. The fence was all they had ever known. But they were alive. Phillip Garrido was arrested on August 26, 2009. Nancy Garrido was arrested the same day. On April 28, 2011, Phillip Garrido pleaded guilty to 14 counts of kidnapping and rape. He was sentenced to 431 years to life in California State Prison. He is currently incarcerated at Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California. He will not leave. Nancy Garrido pleaded guilty to the same charges. She was sentenced to 36 years to life and is currently incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. The driver. The woman who had slowed the gray car beside an 11-year-old girl on a summer morning. 36 years to life. The case was closed in the legal sense. But the questions it generated, about parole supervision, about interdepartmental communication, about how a backyard compound can exist for 18 years in a residential neighborhood while a man's parole officer visits the front door, those questions did not close with the verdict. They opened wider. An independent review of the Garrido parole case, commissioned by the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, found systemic failures at every level. Inadequate supervision protocols. Insufficient training for officers managing parolees with prior kidnapping convictions. A structural resistance to conducting thorough searches of private property without specific documented cause. The system had not been negligent in the way that negligence is usually imagined, no one had ignored clear evidence. The failures were architectural. Built into the design. Legislation followed. Requirements for high-risk parolee monitoring were strengthened. GPS ankle bracelet programs were expanded. Home inspection protocols were formalized and made mandatory in certain categories of cases. Whether those measures are sufficient is, in the view of many victim advocates, still an open question. In 2011, Jaycee Lee Dugard published a memoir. She called it A Stolen Life. She wrote it herself, in her own words, with a plainness and a clarity that reviewers found extraordinary, not because she was performing strength, but because she had already developed, inside the compound on Walnut Avenue, a way of seeing her own experience without turning away from it. The book became a bestseller. The proceeds went toward establishing the Jaycee Foundation, a nonprofit Dugard created to support survivors of abduction and trauma. The foundation runs programs for families of missing children, provides psychological services, and advocates for policy reform in the way that only someone who has lived inside the failure of those policies can advocate. She built something. After everything, after 18 years and 2 pregnancies in a shed and a childhood that was taken before she had finished living it, she built something. She and her daughters are together. They are, by whatever measure applies after what was done to them, free. The house at 1554 Walnut Avenue in Antioch was eventually sold. The backyard compound was demolished. The address still appears on maps, in property records, in county assessor databases. From the street, it looks like any other house on the block. A fence. A driveway. Nothing to see. The school bus stop on Washone Boulevard in South Lake Tahoe still exists. The street is the same street. The mountains above the lake are the same mountains. Time has not moved them. But the girl who walked toward that bus stop on the morning of June 10, 1991, is not the same girl. She is a woman now, with daughters of her own and a foundation with her name on it and a piano she knows how to play. She chose forward motion. Not because the past is resolved, it isn't, it can't be, but because forward motion was the one thing that was always, even in the worst of it, still hers to choose. How close did we come? How many times did the system reach the edge of the backyard and turn around? 18 years of almost. 18 years of the fence being right there and no one opening it. And in that gap, in all those check-ins and tip calls and neighbor reports and database searches that didn't quite connect, 2 little girls grew up not knowing the world existed on the other side. What we owe them, what we owe every child on every quiet street, is to look. All the way. No fence too high. No case too old. No morning too ordinary to deserve our full attention. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, if it made you think about the systems we trust with children's lives, share this video right now. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. And before you go, subscribe to Cold Case Unearthed so you never miss a story we refuse to let the world forget. Every like, every comment, every share tells the algorithm that these cases still matter. Because they do. They always do. If you or someone you know has information about a missing person, contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-843-5678 or visit missingkids.org. To support Jaycee Dugard's work with survivors, visit jakefoundation.org. This has been Cold Case Unearthed. Jaycee's story does not belong to the darkness that tried to hold it. It belongs to her.